Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are going to tackle a name that you have undoubtedly heard, a name that's practically become a synonym for deception, backstabbing, and, well, raw ambition. But today, our goal is to completely separate the actual historical figure of Niccolo Machiavelli from the modern adjective that bears his name. We're going to strip away the centuries of myth to understand the real man and the highly pragmatic logic behind his most famous and infamous ideas.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Is it better to be loved or feared? It is perhaps the most classic, enduring ethical dilemma in all of political history. It's kind of the ultimate Machiavellian test. If you're a leader, if you hold actual power, is your authority more secure when your people love you or when they're terrified of you? It's a pretty jarring question, right? But it perfectly sets the stage for the deeply unvarnished, purely functional view of power that we're about to explore together.
So here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The man behind the adjective. 2. Political turmoil and exile. 3. The fox and the lion. 4. The problem with mercenaries. And 5. A controversial modern legacy.
Starting off with Section 1, the man behind the adjective.
Now, if you look up Machiavelli in a dictionary today, you get a definition that's heavily associated with absolute ruthlessness, clever deceit, and this firm belief that the ends literally always justify the means in politics. But it is absolutely crucial to realize that this modern psychological and political label is really just a distillation of his harshest advice, completely divorced from the actual context of his life.
To really understand his writing, you have to understand this specific number, 13. That is the exact number of years Machiavelli spent actively working in the Florentine government. From 1498, he served as secretary and second chancellor of the Florentine Republic. He wasn't just some armchair philosopher sitting up in an ivory tower. No, he was riding out on horseback to organize citizen militias and personally negotiating with the King of France, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Papal Court. He gained direct, incredibly practical, and often very harsh experience in the actual mechanics of political survival.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Political turmoil and exile. Looking at his career, we see a really rapid and frankly brutal fall from grace. Back in 1498, he's at the absolute height of his administrative power. But then in 1512, Spanish troops invade Florentine territory, the Republic completely falls apart, and the powerful Medici family returns to rule Florence. Machiavelli is suddenly ousted. And the very next year, in 1513, it gets worse. He's falsely accused of conspiracy, thrown in prison, and subjected to the strapado, which was a brutal form of torture where he was repeatedly dropped by his bound wrists. After his release, broken and exiled to a small farm outside the city, well, it was precisely in this state of total defeat and rural isolation that he actually sat down to draft his most famous work, The Prince.
We really have to remember that 16th century Italy was not a unified country. Not at all. It was a fiercely divided, war-torn landscape of rival city-states, constantly shifting alliances and endless foreign invasions. You had plots, betrayals, and sieges everywhere you looked. This chaotic, incredibly violent environment is the absolute core problem Machiavelli was trying to solve. His seemingly ruthless advice in The Prince was basically his proposed solution to bring stability to a wildly unstable world.
Which brings us to Section 3, the fox and the lion. And his famous metaphor brilliantly illustrates his core philosophy. Machiavelli wrote that an effective ruler has to learn to imitate both the fox and the lion. Think about it. The lion possesses brute strength, it's fierce, and can easily frighten away the wolves. But a lion is super easily caught in traps. The fox, on the other hand, is incredibly cunning. It recognizes the traps and can use deceit to survive. But it can't fight off the wolves. Therefore, an effective leader absolutely must combine the sharp intelligence of the fox to spot danger with the overwhelming power of the lion to completely crush it.
Returning to that massive question we asked at the very beginning of this explainer, here is Machiavelli's definitive answer. It is much safer to be feared than loved. Now, he does clarify that ideally, a ruler would be both. But because human nature is fickle, and let's be honest, people will easily betray you when it suits their interests, love is a very weak bond. Fear of punishment, however, that never leaves them. The critical caveat, he adds, though, is that a ruler must impose fear without causing hatred, because hatred leads directly to rebellion, and rebellion destroys state control.
This naturally leads right into his deeply controversial advice on violence. You see, Machiavelli viewed ethics purely through the lens of political utility. He argued that if a leader absolutely must use cruelty to secure the state, it should be applied decisively all at once.
in a single, devastating blow so it never has to be repeated. The idea is that the people will eventually recover and feel secure again. Conversely, mercy and benefits should be granted drop by drop, slowly over time, so that the people constantly savor them and remain intensely loyal. He completely separated the act from traditional morality and evaluated it solely on its effectiveness for state stability.
But what about the things you literally can't control? Well, Machiavelli thought a lot about fortuna, meaning luck or fate. He famously compared fortuna to a raging, destructive river that just floods the plains and ruins absolutely everything in its path. You cannot stop the river when it's actively flooding. However, he argued that a strong, capable leader uses times of peace to build dams and dikes. So when that flood of bad luck eventually hits, all that preparation channels the water safely away. Will and preparation can tame even the wildest twists of fate. Moving right along to Section 4, the problem with mercenaries.
Now, what's really fascinating here is his intense disdain for hired guns. In Renaissance Italy, relying on mercenaries was totally standard practice, but Machiavelli saw them as a fatal flaw. He viewed mercenaries as disloyal, completely profit-driven, and incredibly dangerous. They're more than happy to take your money in peacetime, but quick to run away or even turn on you in war. In fact, he actually blamed the ruin of Italy on its long reliance on mercenary armies. Instead, he strongly advocated for national armies, comprised of loyal citizens who actually have a personal stake in defending their own homes and their liberties.
To Machiavelli, military power and civil law were completely intertwined. As he famously put it, when a state lacks sufficient weapons, good laws disappear. He believed that good laws and institutions are fundamentally impossible to maintain without the backing of a loyal, unified military force. It makes sense, right? You simply cannot enforce the law or protect your citizens from external threats without your own strong, dedicated armed forces.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, a controversial modern legacy.
This is arguably his absolute biggest contribution to modern political science. Before Machiavelli, political writing was deeply tied to religious theology and moral idealism. Rulers were supposed to act according to these high divine virtues, but Machiavelli radically severed this connection. He looked at politics purely as it is, not as it should be. By actively separating the state from morality and religion, he cemented the maintenance of power as the supreme, functional goal of any political entity.
Because he pioneered this brand of stark political realism, his impact has been absolutely staggering. We're talking about heavy-hitting philosophers from across the entire political spectrum. From Hobbes and Locke laying the foundations of the modern social contract, to Rousseau and Montesquieu, all the way down to 20th century thinkers like Foucault and Derrida. Whether they completely agreed with his specific tactics or violently opposed them, they all had to engage with Machiavelli's fundamental redefining of power.
So, the crucial point we need to take away is this. Beneath all the seemingly ruthless tactics, the deception, and the advice to be feared rather than loved, Machiavelli actually had a genuine, overarching purpose. He was writing as an exiled patriot watching his beloved homeland be torn apart by internal squabbles and foreign armies. His ultimate goal, the real reason he prescribed such harsh medicine, was his profound desire to see a strong, unified, and independent state capable of protecting its people. The great irony, of course, is that the man who literally wrote the ultimate playbook on power died in exile, basically completely powerless.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought. We love to use the word Machiavellian as an insult to describe corrupt or ruthless politicians today. But considering everything we've just covered in this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves, was Machiavelli prescribing evil behavior, or was he simply the first person brave enough to write down the unvarnished truth about how power actually works? Has modern politics really changed since the 16th century, or are we all just living in Machiavelli's world? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep asking the tough questions, and I'll see you next time.